Welcome to this first edition of a show we're calling The Talk of Simsbury. My name is Dominique Avery, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this show, which we're debuting today and plan to air whenever there's something pressing to talk about in Simsbury. Today we're going to focus on the 2013 legislative session, which just ended 2 weeks ago. We're taping on June 20th. Unless you're a political junkie, you may be a little unsure of just what happened there and what it might mean for the town of Simsbury. We have three very experienced people here to discuss this. Our first selectman, Mary Glassman, our Board of Education Chair, Lydia Tedone, and former Deputy First Selectman and now State Representative, John Hampton. So I'm so glad the three of you are here. We set this up very quickly, but before I'm going to let them talk, I want to make sure that our viewers understand how well equipped our three guests are to discuss the state legislature. They all really know their way around there. First, Mary. While you may know that she's First Selectman and you may know her as First Selectman, you may not know that she has an extensive background at the state legislature. She worked first for House Speaker Moira Lyons, and then Senate President Kevin Sullivan, and then she was Kevin Sullivan's chief of staff when he was lieutenant governor. And more recently, she was president of the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities for 2 years, which pays very close attention to what happens there. And then we have Lydia. Now, you may know Lydia as a longtime member of the Simsbury Board of Education, and now its chair. But what you may not know is that for the past 2 years, she's been the chair of the statewide Association of Boards of Education, known as CABE, which also pays very close attention to what happens at the state capitol. And then finally, John Hampton, who was elected to the House of Representatives after serving, I believe, 9 years on the Board of Selectmen. But John was not your typical freshman legislator. Most freshmen spend their first session trying to figure out how the General Assembly works. Insiders say it usually takes a minimum of 3 years to get it. But John had a leg up on others because he used to work there as a committee clerk, so he really understood how things work. Okay, now I've taken up half the show with all of your credentials. Let's get into the issue. I think it was really a tale of two sessions, that we had the whole Newtown thing, and then everything else was fit in the second half of the session. And Newtown has gotten a tremendous amount of publicity, so I'd sort of like to not discuss Newtown issues here. But I think we should start with the budget, because that was, I think, the scariest thing for the town of Simsbury, because when the governor presented his budget, he said, oh, no more car tax. So, Mary, what happened? What was your reaction? How did you handle it, and what happened?
Great. Well, thank you, Dominique, for inviting us and for sharing the legislative session with our residents. It's very important what happens in Hartford and how it affects Simsbury. And thank you to SCTV for always hosting these programs. While we're not going to talk about Newtown specifically, we obviously all share our deep sympathy for the folks in Newtown, the families, as well as the town, and as well as the elected officials, and we worked very closely with the elected officials in Newtown. And you're right, most of the session was taken up with those issues, which made it harder to pass the budget because the budget was left for the last weeks of the session. We also had other issues that came out, which is school security and funding, and a lot of those issues did get wrapped up in some of the budget numbers. So you're right, the budget started off very poorly for Simsbury. In fact, the car tax, proposed elimination by the governor of the car tax, would have resulted in $6 million loss in revenue to the town of Simsbury. To put it in context, the town budget, and Lydia will speak to the Board of Education budget shortly, but the town budget is $18 million. So about a third of our budget would have been in jeopardy with the $6 million.
Would have been a disaster.
Right, would have been a disaster. We worked very closely with John, our state rep, with our state senator, with the legislature, and with the governor's office to really help them understand what a devastating impact it would have in communities. Also, the timing would have been devastating. The budget is passed very late after town budgets have already been adopted, and we would have had a very short period of time to try to find out how to make up that revenue. We wouldn't have had time to plan for that loss of revenue or to anticipate it. It would have happened very quickly. So we lobbied very hard and very strong in trying to explain to our legislators and to the governor what a devastating impact that would have had, and John understood coming from his municipal background. And we were very successful in doing that. Bottom line, 30-second summary is town of Simsbury did very well in this budget. We were held harmless. We did not lose revenue in terms of the car tax rate. We didn't gain any revenue. We didn't pick up any additional revenue, but we've gotten to the point where we've lost so much in state aid over the years, and not losing revenue is a win for the town of Simsbury.
Yeah. So I would like to get back to that discussion later, because I understand that there are sort of signals being given out that the towns are going to start losing money in the future, and I want to talk about the Moore Commission. But let me give John a chance to jump in here. And, you know, I know you were a clerk there. I worked with you there.
Yes, absolutely.
But I was wondering what your experience was like. Were there any surprises being a legislator? How did it feel once you got there? How different was it?
Well, I survived my freshman year, and again, thank you, Dominique. And it's great to be with Mary and Lydia, who are two great town leaders, and working with them all the time. It was great background to be a state rep, is to actually work there, and to learn the ropes and know where things are, but nothing prepares you completely for the other side when you're actually sitting in the seat with 150 other legislators and 36 senators and a governor. And I was spoiled, I think, as a municipal leader working with Mary, and in a smaller universe where things happen with a lot more alacrity than at the state level. And, you know, I'm starting kind of as a freshman, and you get bombarded with a lot of information, and, you know, related to Newtown. Who knew before election day that was going to happen?
Right.
And everything, of course, turned on a dime. So our initial focus was on that, but you know, I was appointed to some great committees: aging committee, which I had wanted, and education, which I requested, and public safety. Now, being the former public safety chairman of the town's public safety, I had requested that because of all our experiences with storms and weather emergencies, and I thought, well, great, this will be, but not knowing Newtown happened, that became the primary focus.
Right,
in fact, I actually had a 17-hour hearing on firearms. So,
Right, which CTN broadcast every last second.
and you know, we were talking earlier, thank God for CTN and SCTV. We were just saying earlier, 13 years ago, people at home could not watch their legislature, which is amazing, unless you went there and sat in the gallery, which most people can't do. So what a gift CTN is for people to be able to watch their government in action. But it was a great year, a lot of lessons learned, and you know, we did complete a very successful budget with no tax increases. And as Mary said, you know, we held our municipalities harmless, we preserved our safety net, preserved our ECS funding, public bus transportation funding, which is key for both our public and private schools.
Okay, you've taken away Lydia's thunder. I was just about to ask about that. John touched on ECS funding, ECS education cost sharing, which for people who are not aware is the funding that comes to the towns from the state. They were talking about doing some dramatic changes, which
they've always talked about dramatic changes.
Well, but this year they had a.
And first of all, I'd like to thank SCTV for promoting our discussion here, our conversation about budget and about funding and about municipalities and districts in Connecticut, in particular Simsbury. And I would like to thank you, John, and also Kevin Witkos and our legislators on behalf of CABE and Boards of Education for your diligent work in restoring the funds back back to the budgets for our districts that were so needed, as Mary had alluded to. You know, even the non-revenue is still a win-win for all of us, even on our budgets. And in terms of the ECS, in response to your question, Dominique, as we all know, it's the funding formula that has been, you know, forever increasing in the works of being, you know, reformulated. But and we were concerned in the beginning. We always are concerned. What will be coming for this year, for next year, and this year, you know, we're receiving over $5 million, so we're very pleased with that. Of course, our Board of Finance is also very pleased with that.
So there's
too.
a huge swing there. They were going to take away $6 million and conceivably a whole bunch of ECS funding. Okay,
so this was it's crucial. This is our funding for our districts in Connecticut. So and John, you being on the Education Committee, your first round with that, a lot has come across your plate this past session. I know I testified on behalf of CABE and Boards of Education on several bills that were before education.
She spends a lot of time at the Capitol, which is great.
Do,
well, that's one of the reasons Lydia asked if I would bring Kevin Whitgos on too, and I thought on another day I would. But I was so struck by your combined knowledge of the state capitol. It is not every town that has the people like you who know what's going on.
Well, thank you, Dominique. And you're right. You know, it's hard to explain to someone how the process works, and I think the people of Simsbury are served well by the fact that we know how the process works. You know, the fact that when it came time to make appointments to the Moore Commission by the Speaker of the House, Brendan Sharkey, he was reaching out to legislators and municipal officials that understood both the legislative side and the municipal side to make recommendations. And so John was appointed, and I was fortunate to be appointed to that commission. And so
right, and that was the next thing I wanted to get into, the Moore Commission. Sharkey had started that, I think, already last year. What is the Moore Commission, and what does that mean? And since the two of you served on it, I know it talks about it. The purpose is, in short, sort of regional savings. So tell us a little bit about that and what happened to it at the Capitol.
So the Speaker had convened a bipartisan committee, and I think that was very key. The initial committee was not bipartisan. It was just run through the Democratic majority. Right. But this, a lot of the feedback from municipalities and from us was really wanted to have it bipartisan so that we could really accomplish some things. So it was a group of municipal leaders and state reps, and John and I were both appointed to the regional task force. They looked at regional entities, taxing authorities, a lot of improvements. And one of the committees that we worked on was the back office committee, and looked at sharing opportunities between towns and among towns that would save money and provide efficiencies. A couple of just quick things was one of the bills that we recommended was to help pay for towns to connect with other municipalities.
Computer connection?
Computer connections. Right now, the state of Connecticut offers education, boards of education in schools, free access to connect to other schools. Libraries also are provided free access. Towns are charged for that same service. So we felt in order to encourage collaboration and sharing that we should all be on the same platform, and then we could encourage some savings. So that was passed in a bill. We were very proud of that, and also to help towns, share connections as well. So what does that mean? Well, if towns can share network and backup, then we could actually purchase finance packages with towns from throughout Connecticut. Right now, a lot of our regional collaborations are neighbor-to-neighbor collaborations. Right. So we share with Avon, we share equipment with Granby, we share staff with Canton. By connecting towns, we can have towns share no matter where they're located throughout Connecticut.
What kind of stuff are you talking about sharing?
So for one example is to share backup computerization. So right now all towns have to do backups, and in case there's a computer failure or emergency disaster. Another suggestion was dispatch. When you have a storm, and we've all seen the evidence of 5 storms over the last 2 years, we had been looking at sharing regional dispatches, so town of Avon or Simsbury and Granby would combine. but our concern was that would mean we wouldn't have staffing in our own headquarters, in our own police headquarters. With regionalizing the computer capability, every town could share the same platform, but we would still have our own staff in our town halls. So it just raises the level of the amount of money you can save for your taxpayers. It increases the emergency response, and it increases your ability to save money for your taxpayers and provide better service.
So you mentioned the dispatch. I know that's been what the state police have been trying to regionalize dispatching, and that got quite a bit of blowback. People were upset about it. So Connecticut used to have county government, right?
Exactly.
And then we dropped county government because it was another layer. It was too expensive. But now we seem to be going back there. Is it really going to be savings?
There really is going to be savings. The idea of county governments doesn't make sense in Connecticut. We don't need to add a layer of government. What we're looking at is making it easy for towns to share and to collaborate to save money. Purchasing pools. I know some of the education does that.
Yes.
Our libraries do that. Towns have been doing it, but not as at the economies of scales that we could be doing it.
Wasn't there even some sort of prohibition against regionalization?
Well, that was one of the first bills that we had to pass was to remove legislation that allowed us to share
which is amazing.
Which is amazing. So that was a couple of suggestions that passed. There was another recommendation for a tax incident study. Take a look at our taxing and how municipalities are taxed. Some of the things we talked about, the education cost sharing formula, it punishes towns like Simsbury because we do a good job in special education, but yet our reimbursements are not enough to support our programs. So they punish towns who do a good job because there's no benchmarking and there's no reward for those towns that do a good job. So we need to take a look at how we get state funding because we send a lot of money to Hartford and don't bring back a lot to Simsbury.
So now you mentioned some of the proposals from the Moore Commission were passed. Weren't some of them not taken up by the Senate? Like the efforts to do something about the car tax? Didn't that die on the Senate calendar?
We were told that while we didn't have changes, and John can probably speak to this, while the car tax was eliminated. And again, the town of Simsbury collects taxes on cars and we keep those taxes. So what the proposal was is to not allow us to collect those taxes. Right. So it wasn't that the state was taking away their funding, they were taking away our funding. We've been told that there is going to be legislation again next year to cap the mill rate of what you can charge for car taxes in a way to equalize what taxes are going to be paid. But Connecticut is the most regressive in terms of funding education in the country. And we're still wrestling with a better way to do that.
So I don't want to get you guys in trouble, but we had a new Speaker of the House this year. And to me, I noticed a lot of difference from this year to last year. It seemed to me that there was better time management on one hand, but more late hours than I've ever seen before, not in the 13 years I was watching.
The new speaker is excellent. He's a great guy. He's very dynamic. He was majority leader. He, as Mary knows, and Lydia, he's very measured, very thoughtful, and very moderate in his views. And I sensed a lot more discipline because having worked there, I did know some of the prior speakers and crazy hours. There's always crazy hours, no matter who the speaker is. But we tend to start on time, and
I noticed that you started on time, which was amazing.
But I think a lot of our, I think we did get backed up a little bit because of the Newtown events. I mean, that did. Right. It was not, as you said, a normal session. It was a tale of two sessions where we really were focused on getting that package through. So I think. And there was a lot of other stuff on the plate that the governor's energy proposal, there was minimum wage on the table, there was an immigrant driver's license bill, and then there was the budget. There was a issue on the national popular vote that died, but there was a lot that gets, and I think people at home don't realize how many bills, thousands, get submitted and written, and there's only so many that actually get passed.
Now, all of you are in government, but so that, maybe it's not a fair question to ask you, but I have been noticing a tremendous amount of cynicism about government. And, people don't understand what you guys are doing up there. And and the three of you observe this. Mary, you've seen it from the House, the Senate, and as a lobbyist from the outside and from the legislative branch. I keep arguing with people that positive things are going on, but I don't really make much headway.
People are skeptical of government, and I think they have a right to be. I think the certain incidents over the last few years of politicians going to jail. I mean, we who are in public service take our oath very, very seriously. We are committed to working hard and honestly for the people that we serve. But there are incidents that have given serving the public a bad name. And so we see our role as trying to be as transparent as possible. Right. I think it's easier on the local level because anyone can come into town hall and come into my office and meet with me and talk to me about something before the Board of Selectmen. We're very accessible. Our meetings are open to the public. All of our documents are online. So I think at the local level, it's easier for people to understand what we do because they see it every day. They see when we pave their road. They see when we open a school. They see our meetings. I think it's harder, certainly when you get to John's level, while John's here in the district and meets with folks, you can't stay up all night and see the legislature at work. You know, it's hard to follow. It's hard to understand. So there is that level of skepticism. So we need to do a better job, those of us in public service, to convince people who are good people to get involved and to get active and to volunteer and to be as transparent as we can because we are up against a very bad reputation of public service.
And it doesn't help when something appears in a bill like the driver's licenses for undocumented immigrants suddenly appeared. They moved up the date that it would go into effect, and nobody has confessed to where that came from. And that, I think, was very damaging to the reputation of legislators.
Even something well-intentioned, and I know John has spoken of this in the past, the freedom of information, the right to see the information, the photos at Newtown.
At Newtown.
You know, we need to be careful at the local level, at the state level, to not pass laws for one purpose. We need to pass laws that are good laws and apply to everyone all the time.
John, that was a vote, a difficult vote for you.
It was a very difficult vote. Obviously, the Newtown experience was something that none of us prepared for, and I, met with the family members earlier in the session and toward the end, where this whole issue came about as to whether to publish those photos or not, and we had a very heated conversation in caucus about it, and rightly so, our Latino colleagues and African American colleagues said, well, here we have 26 white children who have been awfully, murdered, which is awful, but every day in the urban cities, Black and Latino children are getting murdered, and why aren't we worried about those photographs? And on the one hand, none of us want to see those photos used for malintent. But to Mary's earlier point, we are in a democratic system and we believe in transparency. And there have been times in our history where pictures help to change things. Who cannot look at the Holocaust pictures and still be disgusted and want to make sure that that doesn't happen? Emmett Till's parents made sure that his casket was open during the Civil Rights Movement to make sure that that never happens again. So you were grappling with those issues of maintaining a sense of privacy for those parents, but also you don't want to quash information that could be helpful to the public good. We ended up on doing some research on the law we passed mimics the national FOI, Freedom of Information Law, and protects those pictures from commercial purposes, being sold. You can't Google them on the internet, because as of September this year, those photos would have been available to anybody. So it was hard. It was a fascinating experience. It's actually a surreal experience to meet with the parents and talk about that. And who could, any one of us would have talked to those parents and said, of course, we understand and don't want that. But on the flip side, you can still Google JFK's autopsy photo. And what if somebody one day looks at that photo and says, oh, they look at it in a different way and noticed something else and learn lessons that could help us in the future. But it was an interesting
And that's what makes our job so hard, because you do want to be fair and be compassionate, but yet make good decisions for the public, not just today, but for tomorrow and for all circumstances. So it does sometimes weigh heavy.
It does weigh heavy, and especially when in terms of we at the local level, you know, we probably do have an easier job because our meetings are on camera and we are very transparent from beginning to end, from crafting budget to initiatives in school. And at the state level, it is difficult. It's a
little more distant.
It's distant. It's a little bit more distant. But I think in terms of you know, asking, you know, constituents and residents, you know, if there's issues to write their legislators, to call their legislators. I mean, it's important that they do that while budget is being crafted on issues.
Lydia, I'm glad, I wanted to emphasize, I'm really glad that you brought that up, that there are so many people who do not realize that they can contact their legislators.
Right.
And should. You know, I was amazed my first week. You know, when I have Simsbury residents as a selectman, we call, in Board of Ed, you call constituents back all the time. So people would call me at the state level, and of course I returned their call, and they're like, "You're returning my call?"
Right.
And I'm like, I tell people, I work for them.
Right.
We work for them. So we take their calls and their letters. We're at their service. That's what public service is about.
Absolutely makes a difference. We just had a public hearing on a proposal to have a new senior center, and it's ongoing, it's a conversation, but we had a packed full room for public comment. We had more than 25 people speak, and that does make a difference when you're sitting and trying to evaluate all the information. Having people come and speak is a big effort, and it's
okay. So I'm going to interrupt you for a second because we're almost out of time. But what would help maybe is if people had an idea of where they can look for information about what is going on in the legislature. If you could just give me in 10 seconds each, what's a source that people can look at, each one of you, 10 seconds.
Simsbury is very active in the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities.
Okay.
If you go to the website CCM and Google CCM, you'll find a legislative summary, every bill that was passed that affects towns, schools, and that's a great source of information.
Okay, CCM.
Connecticut General Assembly's website is cga.ct.gov. We'll flash it on the screen. You can go to my website or Kevin Witkos's website, get up-to-date information. You can always call me, email me. Hopefully we'll flash that on the screen, as well as for Mary and Lydia, how to reach us anytime. Also, the Hartford Current Capital Watch is a great source. Connecticut News Junkie. I think you've got some others, right?
Connecticut Mirror is another one.
Connecticut
Mirror is another one. So, and I think in terms of education, CABE, Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, it's cabe.org.
Now, do they keep updating things?
Absolutely. In fact, a big piece of what we do in CABE is advocacy for boards of education at the legislature, and another piece of that is What Will Our Children Lose, WWOLC.org, and that is a coalition of the big 6 ECMs
I'm going to have to cut you off
No, I
because
didn't
we've
know
run
that
out
one.
of time. I'd like to thank everybody here at SCTV, our director, our camera people, and the office staff for their help in getting this on the air, and especially to my guests, Mary Glassman, John Hampton, Lydia Tedone. And finally, thank you for joining us, and if you missed any part of this show, you can always watch it on our website. Just Google Simsbury Community Television and you can click on it and you'll find it. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.